Hi, I'm Antoinette Naomi, and this is Reshaping Culture. Today I'm bringing you a subject about democracy and the vulnerabilities of democracy. When we talk about the vulnerability of democracy, there are some specific cases throughout history that actually require a review so that we, in the 21st century, can no longer pretend or be vulnerable to the tactics that some savvy politicians make in order to seize power. So I'm pulling from two cases today: Stalin's Soviet Union and also Hitler's Nazi regime. When we talk about Stalin, there are some parallels throughout history. The first thing is propaganda. Propaganda was used so that he could have a narrative. He presented a narrative that he wanted the populace to believe and carry with them about him. Stalin was a career criminal. From 1902 till 1917, he was arrested upwards of 7 times. One of those times, he was sent to Siberia, the Siberian labor camp, and he also escaped from one of those imprisonments. Once Stalin seized power, his narrative was promoting the happy worker state and being a father figure. He launched a civil campaign against the peasant class. His intention was to create modernized farming in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was terrorized by Stalin. Stalin had something called the NKVD. The NKVD was an agency not of the state, but of party power. Under this party power, one must understand not the controlling party as a whole, but only its attempts at oligarchy or an absolute leadership. The mission of the NKVD was to serve the securing of interests, not of the state, but of the handful of usurpers who were making it their chief weapon to advance in the struggle for the seizure of the state as a whole. That is, of the country, the people, and authority, but solely and alone maintaining the security of the ruling groups of persons. So the NKVD reported solely to Stalin. Their sole objective was to maintain power. They terrorized the population, murdered them, and also imprisoned them and sent them to the Siberian Gulag labor camps. Now, one of the sole things that occurred that allowed him to seize power, he used tactics that were forceful and terrorizing. When we move on throughout history, we see also Hitler. Hitler was a bigot and angry. He was a part of something called the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party, it wasn't very popular during those times, but he also was one of those revolutionaries that was angry, and he had a mission to go after Jews. Now, Hitler was arrested in 1923, and he was jailed for a year. In that time, he wrote Mein Kampf. But the significance of this is once he got out, he made his ranks throughout the Nazi Party. The significance of the Nazi Party is they drummed up their base from fear and propaganda. But the main objectives were for them to seize power and then also lead with their bigotry and hatred. The way that they did that: in 1929, Germany was leveled by the Great Depression, and this allowed for the Nazi Party again to drum up a base that was more fierce and more powerful. And this is how Hitler rose to the occasion. In 1933, a Dutchman named Marinus van der Lubbe, he set fire to the German parliament building. Upon the advent of this experience, Hitler convinced the authorities to grant him absolute power. He was granted absolute power, and this is how he, within months, freedom of press was abolished and anti-Semitism was rampant and anti-Jewish laws were passed. Now, the reason why these two scenarios are impactful for today is the fear of how the populace is convinced to follow propaganda, convinced to follow a way of thinking based on fear. And now in democracy, we have something called the rule of law. In the United States, there's something called the Constitution. The Constitution is how that government functions, and there are checks and balances, the House of Representatives, the Senate. But more than that, the Constitution was a well thought out document that allowed for others to be able to enforce the law in a lawful manner. The thing that happens that tricks the populace is that underbelly of fear, the fear of starvation, because we are reliant in modernity. We are reliant on our financial capacity. We're reliant on our ability to purchase food. We're reliant on our ability to have a safe place to live, to have a safe community. And when those things are threatened, that's when fear becomes rampant. That's when those malevolent leaders can take power because they can pass propaganda. In the situation with Stalin, Stalin promoted propaganda with his being the father figure, his having the happy, healthy worker state. Hitler promoted Nazis being the best. He promoted Jews as being the reason, their communism being the reason for the Great Depression. Hitler blamed Germany's demise on that Jewish influx. Over 100,000 Jews had migrated to Germany during that time. But what was significant is Hitler was convinced that Germany's demise was because of Jews. And because of that one man, in his bigotry and hatred and rage, and his obsession against a people, he created a hailstorm. Now, Stalin, because of his civil war against the peasant class, those that lived off their farming, he seized all of the food, seized all of the grains, and stopped all of the private farming for the sake of his own mission, created rampant starvation, having something called the secret police, creating a group called the NKVD that actually terrorized the population. We can bring it forward to 2026. In the United States, a population is being terrorized. Minnesota, Oregon, and there are so many other situations where a regime is moving in and terrorizing a population. The NKVD answered only to Stalin. There is a man that is being sent to Minnesota right now, and he's reporting directly to the person in the Oval Office. We have to understand, if as a democracy we want to move ahead, there have to be some solid ways to secure our ability to have the state in no way be the reason why our food and shelter and livelihood be what generates our fears, a fear of an influx of people coming in and they're causing our demise or our depression, or releasing the propaganda that is drummed up because of the fears. So democracy is violated because of propaganda, and the propaganda of one person or one regime wanting their message to be the resounding law of the land. In order for a democracy to succeed, a democracy is ruled under well-written laws with those that are willing to abide by those laws. In order for us to move ahead as a civilization, we as humans have to understand that our fears are vulnerable to manipulative politicians that want to seize power and emphasize their agenda. And so wherever you are in the world, I say to you, be good to yourself and be good to one another. Peace and blessings.